friend Peter Flynn, who passed away last year. Peter was an amazing man and a gentleman scholar. So this coming installment of the Peninsula Gateway, I did a little tribute to him in the Gateway, talking about the Psalms and the Psalm scrolls that he worked on. I couldn't believe that he passed away. It just seemed really quick. Had a heart attack, and it just shows us the brevity of life. But Peter was a genuine scholar, and I'll miss him. Anyway, in that light, I want to mention to you some text from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a document called 4Q 521. So what that means is that 4 means K4, Q meaning Qumran, because there were scrolls found in other places. Nechal Heber, Masada. So there are other places where these Dead Sea Scrolls were found. We're talking about Jewish material that goes back to the time before Christ, most of it. Most of this precedes the coming of Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. And these are Jewish individuals living in the desert of what we call Qumran. And most believe that they were what we call the Essenes. We have 3 major groups of the apostolic text: Zedakim, Sadducees; Paroshim, Pharisees; and then Essenes. Yeah.
One of the scrolls, Isaiah scrolls, was dated within 50 years after the time of his writing.
Yeah, we have the great Isaiah scroll, which is in the Shrine of the Book. It's in the rotunda of the Shrine of the Book. And so, this full text of Isaiah. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are amazing for so many reasons.
He was writing it?
Close to the time of the writing of it. Some say within 50 years. I want to read you, so go with me to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, it says, he came to Nazareth, this is speaking of Yeshua, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Okay, so
what verse are you at?
This is verse 16, Luke 4:16. What can we say about Yeshua? Where would he go? He would go to the synagogue. Remember, there's no such thing as a church. That's anachronistic. We don't have anything that you can call a church. That's a created word that we've come up with. All you have in the scriptures are ecclesia, if it's in a home, if they're meeting in a home, synagogue, if they're meeting in a building like this, and then the temple, mikdash, the temple. So the temple is on, obviously, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Synagogue, those are community centers that can be in different locations. And then people's homes, ecclesia. They didn't have what we call, when people here today hear the word church, they think of a denomination or they think of a place. They didn't even have that word. So he's in a synagogue, which is like a community center. During the week, different things would happen at the synagogue. They would have business meetings and different things that go on. If you were to come here to the Salvation Army during the week, you would see that there's other things that go on here. They have different groups that meet throughout the week here at the Salvation Army. So if this building were to be excavated, many years from now, they would find material from the Salvation Army. They would find material from us. They would find all kinds of things. They go, what kind of place was this?
It was a synagogue.
It was a synagogue because it had stuff from everywhere, from everybody. Once it was plowed under, you unearth it. You go, what was a synagogue? It was a place of prayer. Okay. So what does it say? It says, and as was his custom. So this is his norm for life. He went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. So notice he's in a synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his custom. And what are they going to do? And he stood up to read. What were they going to read? All you have to read at this time is the Hebrew Scriptures. And just like we did a reading from the Torah. And then normally you do a reading from what they call the Haftorah, the prophets. And then we've added, since time has progressed, we've added readings from the apostolic scriptures that correspond, hopefully, with, which is today why I had us read Yaakov chapter 5, because there's 4 quotes in Yaakov chapter 5 from Leviticus 19. Okay. And I'm going to make the argument in a moment that Yaakov is looking at Leviticus 19, and his whole book is premised off Leviticus 19. Okay? All right, so it says this. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written. By the way, they didn't have books. We don't get to the codex, which is like our book form now, until much like we have scrolls. Okay, you unroll the scroll. We just pass the scroll around through amongst you. You unscroll it, you roll it. And he says this, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. That's the key phrase. Go back to that. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Okay, that's a loaded, all that phraseology there is loaded. It's loaded from places like this. Isaiah 61, 1 and 2, Isaiah 35, 6, and Isaiah 58, 6. So he's in Isaiah, and he's thinking, he's given the scroll, and then he comes off with this montage of scriptures from Isaiah. Makes sense, because the reading for that day is from Isaiah. And by the way, if you go back, we believe that these readings, pairing up the Torah and the Haftorah, a reading from the law of Moses and a reading from the Haftorah, goes back to the 1st century. It would seem that that's borne out here. All right, so he's now skip over with me to chapter 7, Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. The context here is that Yochanan, John, is in prison, and he wants to make sure that Yeshua is the one. You know, before you give your life for something, always good to make sure that it's he's the real deal. So this is Luke chapter 7, and look at verse 18. It says, the disciples of John reported all these things to him, and John, calling 2 of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? And when the men had come to him, they said, Yochanan the immerser has sent us to you, saying, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? In that hour he healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits, and on many who were blind he bestowed sight. And he answered them, go and tell Yochanan what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised. Now look at this. The poor have good news preached to them. The same phrase we saw in Luke chapter 4. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Now, here's what's interesting. I'm going to read to you now from 4Q 521. This goes back prior to the time of Yeshua. Listen to what it says. For the heavens and the earth will listen to his Messiah, and all that is in them shall not stray from the commandments of the holy ones. Strengthen yourself, you seekers of the Lord, in his service. Will you not discover the Lord in this, all you who hope in their heart? For the Lord will bestow care on the pious, and he will call the righteous by name. And over the poor his spirit will hover, and he will renew the faithful with his strength. For he will honor the pious upon the throne of an eternal kingdom, setting captives free, opening the eyes of the blind, lifting up those who are oppressed. And the Lord will perform glorious things which have not existed, just as he said. For he shall heal the afflicted, he will make the dead alive, he will bring good news to the poor. Okay? And he will lead with care the uprooted ones, and he will make the hungry rich. This is from 4Q 521. A document that existed prior to the apostolic scriptures and their publication, and before we had them. So here we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls a document that's by a Jewish community of faith that is mentioning the same things that we're seeing in the apostolic scriptures that Yeshua is alluding to and referring to.
But they're referring to God.
Yes, they're referring to God, to Messiah. And it's interesting that Yeshua in Luke 4 and in Luke 7 says, hey, these things that you've heard, which some of them come out of the Hebrew scriptures, but many of them are coming out of Qumran. So he's alluding to things that were written in the Qumran documents of the Dead Sea. He knows the literature that has preceded him, both the literature of the Hebrew scriptures and the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's fascinating to me how he's very much in tune with what they're saying. And he's alluding to them on numerous occasions. And I think the more we know about these scrolls, the more we see that he's alluding to them and talking and interacting with them. So this is Jewish literature that precedes the time of Christ. That's not in necessarily what we would call the canon of the Hebrew Scriptures. So to me, the Dead Sea Scrolls are fascinating because they give us so much background, tons of background. And we could spend lifetimes just on the Dead Sea Scrolls and what they tell us about the life of Yeshua and the teachings of Yeshua. I think he's interacting with them on numerous occasions. He's clearly aware of what they've said and what they've written. And so when he says, go tell John what you've seen, and then he lists these things, some of these things are to be found in the Hebrew Scriptures, but some of them are not. But where they are found is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. For instance, with the Apostle Paul, we had searched in vain to find any time. Paul, about 4 or 5 times, uses the phrase, works of the law. The works of the law. He talks about it in Galatians a couple times, once in Romans. There was nowhere could we find in the literature preceding Paul this phrase, works of the law. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have a document called Miksat Ma'aseh HaTorah, Son of the Works of the Law. And that's a fascinating document because it gives us an idea of what Paul is talking about and what he's alluding to. So it's not just Paul speaking, out of school. He's actually referring to some material that's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I think we have to do more work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, yes.
Could you expand on what those talk about?
The Mitzvah Ma'aseh Torah, I'm going to do a teaching on that. It basically, what we would call, how they put it, things that outwardly let people know that you're Jewish. Basically things like tzitzit, eating kosher, things that would let people know from an outside looking in that you're set apart. That you're set apart. It wasn't hidden things. It was things that people would go, okay, they're wearing this or they're wearing that or they're doing this or that. So I'll have to read you the whole document. I want to read it to you and kind of go through it because I think that document is huge for understanding Paul. It's a huge document for understanding him because it's the only place we have found prior to Paul. I don't think Paul was pulling the phrase out of thin air. And it talks about specific laws, and some of them are these, what they call, I'm trying to think of the term that they use, but basically it's identity markers. Identity markers that would identify a person as one who follows the Torah, that somebody from the outside could see.
Would you say it's more like Torah-based or rabbinical-based or a combination?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. It's not just Torah-based. Although we have to understand this. Both from the Qumran community, I'll give you an example of how they're thinking. They're fascinating on this. Since the first group that went out into the desert were most likely priests, they have a problem with the Jerusalem priesthood. Which is ironic because Yeshua also has a problem with them. They have the 2 issues that they have primarily are this. Purification. They don't believe that the Jerusalem temple is being careful to make sure that people coming inside the temple are pure. The other issue that they have is calendar. They don't like the calendar of the Jerusalem temple. They're following a solar lunar calendar. You and I are on this solar lunar calendar that's 364 days. A lunar calendar by itself is 354. So there's 10 days off. So the Qumran Essenes believe that the calendar of the temple is off, but they say Messiah will set that right. Then they say, we also think there's a lot of impurity there. So we're gonna go out into the desert and we're gonna become a holy group. They're fascinating because what they do is they say, well, how then do we have to have the temple to worship God? We need the temple in order to do all these things. So they say, well, there is another temple in the Bible. There's a temple in the heavens. So what they start talking about is that we will worship as if we are attending in our minds at least, as if we are attending this heavenly sanctuary. And as if the angels are with us while we worship. And you should read and when you read their writings on this, I'll do a little more on this later, but it's fascinating how they're thinking through these things, which is interesting because post 70 AD, Rabbinic Judaism also had to deal with what do we do when we don't have a temple. So now, what do we do for the sacrifices? We have to replace them somewhat. You have to have something to fill the void. So I think you start to see, here's this group that pulls away. Well, Yeshua says, I got a real problem with this temple too. His issues were, there's corruption.
To say the least.
To say the least, yeah. So he goes to the temple, and depending on which gospel you read, he goes to the temple twice and cleanses the temple. So things are being bought and sold there, and that's the whole problem. So Yeshua also has problems with the temple. And by the way, we know that the temple is corrupt because it's the temple leadership.
Yeah.
It's the temple leadership that is going to work in cahoots with Rome to bring about the death of Yeshua. It's not the Jewish people, it's the leadership of the temple. Why? Because he's affecting their financial stability and their power base. Yeah.
Did he have a problem with the temple or the operation of the temple? Because the temple itself, that was his.
Yeah, okay. Operation of the temple, the way the temple was being handled. We know that prior to, this goes back to the Hasmoneans in 164 to 167. We know that the temple priesthood, the high priesthood is being sold by Rome to the highest bidder. So we can see that in the literature. So people who aren't even high priests or have high priestly lineage are being allowed to become high priests so that because they know that it's a way to make money. Whoever has control of that is making some serious money. Not necessarily in the best of ways. All right. So let me do a little bit of review. So I'm going to bring some more of the Dead Sea Scrolls material to you over the weeks, and I just think it's fascinating stuff because it gives us insight into the Hebrew Scriptures. It gives us insight into the Apostolic Scriptures. It gives us insight into this Jewish community that preceded Yeshua, and they know about the Paroshim, they know about the Zedachim, and they themselves are a very interesting group in how they're interpreting Scripture. All right, so today we are in Leviticus, chapter 16. I'm just doing a quick review because I want to get to chapter 19. Chapter 16 of Leviticus deals with the Day of Atonement. You can read more about the Day of Atonement in Leviticus chapter 23, which when we get there, we'll talk about that. Two big things. Here's the thing. With the Day of Atonement, the issue is this, that there has been, over the year, impurities brought into the temple. One would hope that these impurities have been brought into the temple accidentally. And in his mercy, God has not struck anyone dead, even though they came in there with death on them. Okay? They did not, for whatever reason, come in there with life. Now, this speaks to just the issue of the tabernacle. So the whole issue is we have to hit the reset button on the tabernacle. So the Kohen Hagadol, the great high priest, goes into the temple. He does a sacrifice for himself, a sacrifice for his family, and then he cleanses everything in the temple. So everything, the blood is this ritual detergent that cleanses everything. In just a moment, I'm going to talk about the sacrifices because I think the sacrifices have been vastly misunderstood within Gentile thinking. I heard it again this week. I'll give you an example. If you read the prophets denounce sacrifices. Not because they're against the sacrifices, but because they're against people bringing sacrifices when their heart is not truly repentant. But you'll hear the prophets say things like this. Stop bringing your sacrifices. I've had enough of your sacrifices. No more sacrifices. And if you read that with a Gentile mindset, you go, see there, look at that. I've heard it this week. See there? God didn't like sacrifices. He's against them. He's the one that told him to do it. It's not that he's against the sacrifices. He's against the sacrifices for with the wrong heart. If there's no true repentance, then stop bringing them. The other issue is this. Most sacrifice had little to do with sin. We have lumped all sacrifices into the category of repentance for sin. Most sacrifices didn't have anything to do with repentance for sin. You have a Thanksgiving sacrifice. You can bring a sacrifice just to thank God and have a meal. You can have all kinds for purification. And purification didn't mean you had sinned. It just means that you can't go in the temple this way. So there's been a mass misunderstanding of the role of the sacrifices and what they accomplished. Let me state this. As it pertains to sin, does the blood of bulls and goats cleanse anyone? No. Never were designed to. That's not their design. The primary design of the sacrifices was so that a truly grateful or repentant person could actively demonstrate their relationship with God in His space, in His place. Well, what's happened? So Yom Kippur comes along because what's happened, we've had over the year, we've had people come into the most holy, this holy space, and they've come in there and they didn't even know it. They've touched somebody or contracted death. The nature of living in this fallen world is that we contract death. We touch death. If you walk on dirt, you know what dirt is? Death. You come across death. You walk across, you go to a graveyard, you come across death. There's death everywhere. So, but He's alive. And so He's brought this down here. So you can't come here until you're fully alive. So if you're bleeding, you can't come in because, well, you're bleeding and life is blood is a life fluid. You got to wait until that's sealed up and your blood levels will come back to where they're supposed to be. It's all related to coming into His presence in the temple. This physical place. Okay, so chapter 17. Look at chapter 17 with me. Look at verse 12. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 12. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm in verse 11. Verse 11, sorry, this is a very important verse. I think the translations here messed this up. They have the same Hebrew word, nephesh. Nephesh, meaning life. They're going to translate it soul. But listen, for the life, nephesh, of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your, and most of your translations say souls, but it's the word nephesh again. Okay?
What chapter and verse?
Leviticus 17:11. So I have given you blood, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. There's two ways that you can kill something from the ancient Near Eastern way of thinking. You can cover the mouth of something and they stop breathing. And for the most part, they viewed death as the lack of respiration. They weren't thinking in terms of heartbeat or in terms of brainwaves. If there's no air in the lungs, you have ceased to exist. You can watch somebody's breathing just start slowing down. Pretty soon, they stop breathing. Okay, they're dead. You get close to their mouth, and you don't feel the air coming out. Life has gone out of them. Or the other thing you can do is, they know that if you cut something and you watch it bleed out, it dies. Now, they weren't necessarily connecting respiration and blood, but they knew this. If you bleed it out, well, it dies too. Okay, so the life of the flesh is in the blood. They didn't understand that the blood was oxygenating the body, carrying oxygen to the body, allowed your lungs to breathe. And I got to tell you, it's one of those. I never thought that I would experience this. I was in the room probably 4 months ago, and a gentleman, some of you would know, I'm not going to mention his name, but some of you would know him. He was on a respirator. And now we can artificially breathe for you. We put a tube down your throat. We can force air into your lungs. Whether or not that's good or not, we can debate that later. But
if you want the air, it's really good.
If you want the air, it's really good. Yeah. Yeah, if you want the air, it's really good. So the time had come, and his family had made the decision that they would remove him from the respirator, which is always a tough decision. Because you have to ask the question, are they going to breathe on their own? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it was quite clear that in this instance, that he would probably not breathe on his own when the respirator was taken out. So the nurses are in the room, they're monitoring him, they bring in a respiratory therapist, and she takes the tube out. And literally within 5 minutes, you could watch the breathing just slowly go down. And he still has brainwave activity, but there's no respiration. And you just watch as air, without this forced air, he's no longer alive. And there's gone, okay? And to see that and to watch this is sometimes surreal, because we shield ourselves from death. We don't want to see it. We don't want to see our animals die. We certainly don't want to see people die. And so we're anesthetized to it and shielded from it. We're very sterile. And yet, God says that the life of the flesh is the blood. I've given you the blood as a ritual detergent. That's chapter 17. Chapter 18 and 20. Chapter 18 and chapter 20 deal with prohibited sexual relationships. We could spend lifetimes on those two chapters. A lot of stuff in there. Because how close to the bloodlines can you get and still marry someone? And these are the kinds of things, there are certain things that are pretty clear. So here's the rocket science of it. The way the scriptures want things, one man with one woman for one lifetime, hopefully. That's the ideal. One man with one woman. Genesis 2:24. No dead people, no animals, nobody in your immediate family. And it goes through a whole list of people that you're supposed to stay away from. Okay? So 18 and 20 of Leviticus, basically you're talking about prohibited relationships. And by the way, when you read Leviticus 18 and 20, you think to yourself, as you read the newspaper, how relevant this stuff is. I mean, you look at this and just go, this ought to be obvious. And yet, unfortunately for a culture that we have today, it's not obvious. Something intuitively should tell you that you as a human being were not designed to have relations with an animal. That's just messed up. Really messed up. And yet, we have to say it in the scriptures.
All of those things were done by the cultures in the land.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You won't have to, he's right, because you don't have to say it if nobody's doing it. If nobody's doing these things, you don't have to say anything about it. The very fact you have to say something like, don't do this, tells you there were people, significant amount, doing it. Yeah. So, here's a big one. Here's a big one for our culture. Fathers cannot have relations with their daughters. Pretty straightforward.
Right.
You'd think that would be obvious. But we have a whole culture that doesn't think it is. You can't have relations with somebody, even if they're of the opposite gender, if there's no consent. You'd think that'd be obvious. There has to be consent. Again, you think this, read through 18 to 20. And it just boggles the mind. Absolutely boggles the mind. So, all kinds of things going on in 18 and 20. So, if you have questions about that later on, we can talk about that. But chapter 19 is I say, shoehorned in between 18 and 20, and it's fascinating because chapter 19 of Leviticus is primarily orbiting around the 10 words, the 10 commandments. So I'm going to go to the notes for just a moment. Take your handout if you have it. We're going to pick up the reading here. So Leviticus 19 is an interesting chapter, both for its structure and content, as well as its placement within Leviticus. Chapter 19 is wedged between chapters 18 and 20, that both deal with forbidden sexual partners. I have maintained that it's not necessary that all parts of the text be chronologically ordered, and in this case, one wonders why chapter 19 is shoehorned in this location. Two motifs govern this chapter, and the first is the phrase, I am the Lord your God, or the shorter version, I am the Lord. This phrase is found 16 times in chapter 19, first appearing in verse 2 and finally in the last verse. While I won't be dogmatic, I believe this terminology is shorthand for the fuller phrase, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, which we find at the opening of Exodus 20, which, oh, by the way, happens to be about the 10 commandments. Okay, 10 words. The second motif governing this chapter is holiness. The Hebrew word kadosh means to be set apart for service to God, with the idea of exclusivity built in to the concept. One final observation before we dive into Leviticus 19 seems to orbit, I mentioned this, around the 10 words of 10 commandments, as found in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. And by the way, in the past we've done comparisons between Deuteronomy 5 and Exodus 20, and there's some differences in motivation for things. But primarily the wording is the same. So the 10 words are foundational. In fact, I find it interesting that they're called the 10. They're always the 10, mentioned 3 times that way, 10 words. And yet we have people who want to pull out certain commandments and say, well, these don't apply. So I have written, I'll share next week, just on the Sabbath, because here's the big one is the Sabbath. Everybody wants to do away with the Sabbath.
Or modify it.
Yeah, or modify it. So, all right, here we go. Verse 3. Verse 3 speaks of revering parents and keeping the Sabbath, as both of these commands come from Exodus 20. Exodus 20, verse 12, Exodus 20, 8 to 11. It is the responsibility of every child to obey their parents unless the command of a parent asks the child to do something immoral, unethical, or illegal. When children learn to obey the commands of parents, both father and mother, then they also learn to obey God. God has placed parents, by the way, parents are co-creators, as authority figures over children for the purpose of protecting and providing basic life needs. The Sabbath is juxtaposed to the command regarding parents, perhaps to teach that sacred time brings sanctity or holiness to life on a weekly basis. The bottom line is this. Show me a person who obeys their father and mother, and I'll show you a person who has not as much difficulty honoring God and obeying God. Show me a person who has difficulty honoring their parents or obeying their parents, and in that rebellion, I can also show you a person who will most likely be rebellious towards God. There's a correspondence. Because God designed parents, and by the way, we've said this in the past. Many parents are difficult, and they got their problems. There's levels of dysfunctionality, on the spectrum. But for the most part, if parents say to you, clean your room, eat your food, do this, if they tell you what to do or not to do, for the most part, parents try to look out for their children. For the most part. And when they're looking out for you and trying to protect you and provide for you, then you have the responsibility to be obedient. And it's in that obedience to parents that you learn and you train yourself to be obedient to God. All right. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. Deal with commands to farmers within the land and their responsibility to those who have little or no food. For other texts dealing with commands related to farmers, you can see Exodus 23:11, Leviticus 23, and Deuteronomy 24. First, the farmer is not to reap to the corners of the field, but the exact amount to be left unclean is not specified. Second, the produce that has fallen prior to gleaning or that occurs during gleaning is to be left untouched. How interesting that the Torah provides a means by which those who have no regular source of food can provide for themselves if they are willing to enter the fields and work. While many people today do not do agricultural farming, I believe that we can practice the principle of leaving the corners by helping feed the poor and by using our resources to help those in need. Most of us don't farm. Most of us don't have land that we go out and we cultivate. But I think we have to find a way to leave the corners, to find a way to give of our energies or our money or time in order to help those who are in need. Yeah.
You make a really good point here that how interesting that the Torah provides a means by which those who have no regular source of food can provide for themselves if they are willing to enter the fields and work.
And do some work.
Right.
How can we do that practically by giving,
Yeah, it's tough.
and
The system is stacked against us in that regard because we have conditioned the whole society to expect
right.
the government to pay for everything. We live in a culture of entitlement where people expect that, well, I'm owed this.
Really?
This belongs to me by entitlement. I mean, the government owes me this.
I didn't have to come into this world, so the world owes me everything.
Yeah, so we're living in a world of entitlement now. So it's very tough, to your question. I think we can find positive ways to do that. I'll give you an example, though. How many of you have seen these people? And I always wonder, they're standing on the street corner and they always have a sign that says, please help, we'll work for food.
Right. No,
Right.
that's not-
They turn down
And then
the-
I've stopped and asked them, okay, if I help you get a job, are you willing to work? And they go, no, not really, let's just take $5. I just want $5 from you.
Yeah, good luck.
I actually appreciate the person who says, don't want to work, just want $5.
Yeah.
At least you're being honest with me.
Right.
I actually saw a guy one time, I actually bought it for him. He had a sign that said, I just want a beer.
I saw that guy.
I just want a beer, and I went and bought him a beer. I was like, thank you for the refreshing honesty. Because at least you're telling me the truth. You're not telling me I want to work.
And they turned me down, yeah.
You're telling me I want a beer. Okay, fine, I'll buy you a beer. I appreciate the honesty. You're not trying to fool me. So not try to, I'll work. And then because you ask them, I've done this multiple times. Do you want a job? I'll find somebody who'll give you a job. Nah, not really.
Brent?
So hold on one second. I got to go around in order. One right here, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I was thinking that, I think in our country, people used to do that up until the 20s when we had the Dust Bowl situation in Tacoma. And all these people wanted to work, and they were put down, they were ridiculed and this and that. And then the New Deal came in where they were just trying to help these people to get back on their feet, which was also for working.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it was the thing where there was such a majority of people that needed help that it totally disillusioned everybody. And then who came to the help was the government.
Right.
And I think that's probably where this whole thing started from.
Yeah, and so look, you have individuals who lose their jobs, and we have what is the
Unemployment insurance.
unemployment or workman's
Workers'
comp.
compensation, yeah, it's not, no, same.
Okay, workman's comp, but there's another one too. Okay, look, if you're out of a job, and the idea was this: Social Security. The idea was that you would go on that for a period of time until you got to the next job. It was a stopgap measure. I've seen families that have been on Social Security for, 2, 3, 4 generations, and nobody plans on working. They don't plan on going out and getting a job because they can go to the mailbox and the government sends them a check. So nobody even thinks that that's how I got to go to Scotty and then come to you. Go ahead, Scotty, and then come back to you, Bill.
When you talk about leave the corner of your field, I don't remember if you introduced me to him, but he's a guy in Israel.
Yes.
He harvests his wine.
Yes.
And then, when he can't get people to come in the field.
Yeah, that's Gershon.
The corner of his field, and then he gives them money.
Yeah,
That's my kind of guy.
I agree. Yeah. So he's talking about Gershon Ferenczi.
What, from the wine delivery?
So Gershon has a winery in a little bit south of Jerusalem, and to show you how the mentality is, he told people, come to my fields and take the corners. I'll leave the corners where you guys can come and take this stuff. And everybody thought to themselves, this guy's nuts. Sure, he's gonna leave the corner of his field. He's a nutcase.
Nobody does.
Nobody believed him. So because nobody believed him, nobody came. So the following year, he bottled up, corked, bottled everything, the whole thing, labeled his wine, and went out in the streets of his area and just started handing out bottles of wine to people he thought were in need.
I need
And,
one.
and his, yeah,
I feel the need.
yeah, feel the need. So the nice thing was this. I like his mentality. He said, if they won't come to my corners, I'll take my corners to them. And that's at least the spirit of the Torah. So, yeah, Bill, go ahead.
The scripture says that God has promised us food, clothing, and shelter. Now, they like that, but they don't go to the next step. It says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, then these things will be given to you.
Right. Good word.
That's right.
All right. Leviticus 19:14. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you know, when I was in Napa, I used to live there, and when they would go through the harvest of the grapes, there was always grapes left on the ground, and there was a certain amount of grapes left on each vine. I used to wonder, why didn't they take them all? I guess that was the reason.
I hadn't thought about that. Okay, good word there. All right, so verse 14, Leviticus 19. It says, we are commanded to resist, listen to this, using the physical handicap of another to our advantage. To use the handicap of another in an attempt to demean or abuse them is both cruel and violates basic human decency. This verse goes on to say that we must fear God, which is the text way of saying that while the blind may not see and the deaf may not hear, our God is watching and listening. As a society, we have the Torah responsibility to make the way easier for those who have disabilities or handicaps, rather than using these persons because they are vulnerable due to physical limitations. Do you realize we did not get took us to 1990. It was President Bush 1, before we had the ADA, American Disabilities Act. It took us to 1990. Think about this, if you were in a wheelchair, would you want to go to a place where you couldn't get in the bathroom and you couldn't even get in the door? I'm talking about public places. You couldn't even get in the door. So they said, you know, the doors have to be wide enough to where you can get in. And if you're going to make it multi-level, you have to put in an elevator or some lift. And if you're going to have bathrooms, you got to have a stall big enough to get your wheelchair in there. It took us to 1990 to legislate this. So now, buildings that were built before 1990 are grandfathered in, but if you renovate, you're supposed to upgrade and make the requirements to have a ramp, tables designated in your restaurant, bathrooms, doors, okay? Just common sense. But it's not so common. But the Torah says to us, you've got to give consideration to those who have handicaps. Those who cannot mobilize the way you do. You don't even think, and here's the thing, we don't even think about it because it's not our world. We go in any door we want, go in any place we want. There's no barriers. So the Torah says to us, hey, look, you have to give consideration to those who are blind and who are lame. You have to help them out. Just common sense. Again, I wish it was common. Yes.
You know, these things are fine, and a lot of the legislation that we have to help people is good. But just this week, I heard that in Puerto Rico, which per capita has more people in subsistence than we do here. To the point where they've had to close 148 public schools because they can't afford to keep them open. And if you can't educate your children, your future is dead. Agreed.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. Go with me to, thank you for that. Go with me to Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 to 34. This is the second to last paragraph on the second page. Leviticus 19, 33 to 34 deals with the treatment of the resident alien, Hebrew Ger, as these individuals did not have citizenship and may not have known all the local societal customs. Israel was to treat the sojourner as if that person had been born in the land. Notice that the text goes on to say that you shall love him as yourself, which is language similarly close to 1918. Israel as a nation was to have the collective memory of having been slaves in Egypt, to remind them that they should never mistreat or oppress others as they had been by Egypt. All right. So, sticky wicket, and you'll forgive me. Sticky wicket. In the 1930s, 1940s, I was talking about this recently with some people. 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. People, that many of you will remember that time period, some of you will. Immigration to this country was by people primarily coming from Europe. And they were coming here and they wanted to learn our language, they wanted to get a job, and they wanted a better life. But they were coming to better themselves and better us. They brought skills with them. Fast forward to 2016, 17, and immigration has changed. Immigration has changed. And so when we talk about immigration with regards to what we had in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and what we're experiencing now, it's a different conversation. It has to be a different conversation. Do we want to be loving and kind? Absolutely. Do we want to be respectful of all peoples? Absolutely. Does that automatically mean that everybody from another place should come here?
No.
And I think the answer to that is no. For this reason.
Not enough land.
If the people coming from other places have already done really bad things there, they shouldn't come here as a way of escaping. If you've already been doing bad things in place A, you should not come here
And continue.
and continue doing bad things.
The city of refuge is for those who commit something accidentally.
Accidentally. Yeah, sanctuary cities in the Bible were for people who accidentally did something,
Oh, we're gonna country.
not for people who did something intentionally
And they continue to.
and continue to do
And
it.
this is where I think we have the problem where the leftists have gravitated to language that is in the Bible and that's similar, and they try to make it something that it's not.
Right.
And there's a lot of that going on, you know, that the sanctuary cities is just an example of.
Right, they're using the term sanctuary cities. You know where they got that
Yeah.
concept?
Yeah, that didn't come from
That concept
line.
comes from the Hebrew scriptures,
Right.
where you have cities of refuge. But the cities of refuge in the Hebrew scripture were for people who had accidentally. And if the family of the person that you accidentally killed, I put accidentally in,
On purpose.
then the family could go to the elders of the cities of refuge and demand a trial. They were to then hold a trial.
They have evidence.
And the person was allowed to give testimony, the family was allowed to bring testimony. And if you were considered not guilty, then you had to live in that city of refuge for the rest of your life until the high priest died. If you were living in a city of refuge and the high priest died, then everybody in the cities of refuge was exonerated, so to speak. It was clemency. But you stayed there, but you were alive. But it wasn't for the person who joined a gang, killed a bunch of people, and then said, you know what, I want a place to hide out. Or I've been in country A, killing people and doing bad things, now I want to come to country B and hang out. No, that was not the purpose of it.
After the trial, he was thrown out the gate.
And if they found you guilty, they turned you over to the family.
Done.
If they found you guilty. They said, you know what, you're guilty, you ran here saying you were innocent, we've done a trial, we have witnesses, we have testimony, you're not innocent, you can't stay here. But having said all that, for people who are truly in need, yes, we should be an open-armed place. If they want to come here and they want to work and they want to be a part of us and they need a safe place, absolutely. I'm not talking about those type of people. Unfortunately, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we didn't have, here they are, Hezbollah, ISIS, ISIL, Hamas. We didn't have all these. Not in the way we do now. MS-13. 10,000 members of MS-13 across our country. They're a network. So I'm just saying, things have changed. So now we have to be smarter in who we let in. We have to be more vigilant. I just listened to a man 2 weeks ago who came from Europe. German man, actually of Jewish ethnicity. And he came to this country. You know what? He said when he went to school, he didn't know English, but he learned English. He speaks fluent English now. He learned to speak our language and live in our culture. And he's been a very productive member of our society. But he's contributed. And he wasn't a bad person when he started out. He wasn't trying to do bad things. So this whole thing is, I want to be compassionate, absolutely. I want good people from other places, if they're fleeing oppression, to come here, absolutely. But do I want people who are doing bad things in other countries to come here? No.
I want to know who you are.
I was just yesterday I go just about every Friday to the ICE center here in Tacoma. So Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this center is huge, but we have some pretty bad people there that have done some pretty bad things. So we're putting them, we're taking them back to where they came from, because they started out doing bad, they got here and continued doing bad. So it's a tough issue. I understand that. It's very tough. But I'm just trying to say, look, we can't use the scriptures and sanctuary cities as using this as a parallel. Yeah, hold on, go ahead.
I was just thinking that if you look at the history of our country, when people did come from the European and also China, you know, they would go into Ellis Island, New York, and then they kind of established these ghettos where ghetto came from, because the people were comfortable in their own little areas.
Sure.
So and then, but through adversity and whatever they went through, they economically grew, and then they left New York City, went into different areas. And then you have, the Irish and the Chinese who were out west, who were building the railroads, and then they had adversity too. And then they were able to go in different areas. And so it's, even though it wasn't easy for anybody coming here, they all had to do whatever they did, but they had that drive to change, they had that drive to go and make something of themselves.
Right. They came here with the belief that if they worked hard, that there was a better life here. And they found that to be the case. That they worked hard and they were able to build a home, have some land, and they were able to have a better life. If you're coming here to join a cell group or to join a gang, that's not a legitimate reason to come here. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not only those that have committed social crimes like that when they're here, but to let people in that have ideologies that want to destroy our way of life, our nation. That's totally different. During World War II, they interned a lot of the Japanese because after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, we didn't know who was and who was not a spy. Now today, they badmouth those that did that at that time, but it was for the good of the nation, the protection of the nation, that happened. Today, we let people come in that are sworn to do away with our way of life.
Yeah, and this is the difficulty we're running into. So it's different ideologies. These are driven by faith-based ideologies. Yeah, go ahead.
But the problem is today, the main motivation is that we got one political party looking for voters.
No comment. All right. Yeah, all right. Go with me to page 95. Stand with me, please. Page 95. Traditional Elenium. Alenu l'shapea kleadon hakol la tegenu la leotse breshi shelo asanu kugei havatzot velo sramanu kenishpakot adema shelo samkalkenu kahem v'goravenu kekol amona v'yanatnu korim u'mishtakarim u'movim lifnei melech malkei hamakim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'yom Hahu, B'yom Hahu, Yihei Adonai Echad, U'Shemo, U'Shemo, U'Shemo Echad. Together, we are duty bound to praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the one who created from the beginning. But he did not make us as the nations of the lands, and did not place us as the families of the earth. Since he did not assign our portion as theirs, nor our lot